Hi, I'm Whitney Espick, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mark Weber, and welcome to the MIT Faculty Forum. I will serve as today's moderator, and I'll also present on some of my own work. As a reminder, we welcome your questions during this chat. For MIT alumni, Alin, if you could mute yourself, or Stephen, I'm hearing an echo, that'd be helpful, thanks. For MIT alumni joining us via Zoom, please use the Q&A feature found on your toolbar. For all others listening on YouTube, you may add your questions to the comments field. And we also encourage you to tweet using hashtag #MITBetterWorld. And we'll get to as many questions as we can throughout this discussion. So today we're talking about blockchain, which is an exciting new technology and something that's very much part of the zeitgeist today. All of us are working at academic institutions, all three of us, and I think that this is an important time in this space for academic research because the hype is ahead of the technology at this point. There's a lot of foundational research that needs to happen in order to make sure that this space is shepherded and oriented toward the public good. Unfortunately, there is a massive bubble going on, and you can argue that that's a necessary thing in a similar way that we had a dot-com bubble. That was a lot of people lost a lot of money, and a lot of people got burned, but it did kind of out of that came came a lot of very real applications and innovations around the internet. And I think we're seeing a similar time right now. And so just as academia played an important role in the shepherding of the internet, I think it's going to play an important role in the shepherding of blockchain technology. So we will explain what we're working on in that regard, both at a high level, and we'll take you into some very specific use cases and applications that each of us have been working on. So without further ado, I will have Alin introduce himself, and then following Alin will be Stephen Gordon from Babson College, and then I will close things out sharing with you some of my own research. So Alin, take it away.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. My name is Alin Dragos, and I work at the MIT Media Lab in a group called the Digital Currency Initiative. Here I head strategic partnerships for the group, and I also lead our efforts on product management for the Lightning Network, which is our layer 2 scalability solution. Before MIT, I was a vice president at Fair Data Corporation, leading a family of products for banking underbanked individuals across the world. I've also spent a good amount of time in the startup world in a variety of roles, from raising funds to scaling business models and to managing a post-acquisition integration. First, I wanted to give a little bit of a background on the Digital Currency Initiative, which we affectionately call the DCI. We're a group of researchers housed at the MIT Media Lab, working on developing the software and infrastructure needed for open blockchains to reach their full potential. This includes security, scalability, stability, and interoperability for public permissionless blockchains. And when I say that, I mean Bitcoin and Ethereum and everything that doesn't require some sort of permissioning mechanism. Today, I also wanted to bring up our work on layer 2, scalability and interoperability. Right? This is based on my colleague Taj Draja's work, Taj being the co-author for the original Lightning Network paper. First, let's start with some context, right? Which is, I just wanted to kind of start by saying that despite the hype, public blockchains are in their infancy. This is very, very early days. The existing design, in which all of the nodes participate in the consistent mechanism, works great for gathering initial adoption or kind of getting blockchains up to a particular level, but it doesn't scale. But Bitcoin and Ethereum are the two public chains with most acute scaling issues, as some of us have experienced with the crypto kitty craze, or with the ICO, the latest ICO of the day. Basically, you reach a number of transactions that basically freezes the network, which is a big problem, right? There are a number of projects working to address this problem, which is really good, and we at the DCI are working on some of them. Also, to make things a little bit easier to follow, I'd like to differentiate between on-chain solutions, the so-called layer 1 scalability solutions, and off-chain solutions that we call layer 2. Right? Layer 1 solutions are those solutions that improve the number of transactions that can be processed by all nodes in the system, whether by increasing block size or by reducing some transaction size or signature size. There are a number of approaches, right? Layer 2 solutions eliminate the need for all nodes to process every transaction, and instead create a direct channel between two participants, thus allowing for those participants to transact directly, if you will. So you may say, okay, this is not a perfect idea, right? And that you're now reducing the level of security in the system. Well, this is what Lightning Network, and this is where Traj's really relevant work came into place. The Lightning Network introduced a way to transact between nodes without materially reducing security of those transactions. So this works. This is a fairly elegant solution, and it also brings a number of material benefits, out of which I'll name 4. Right. The first one is that you now have instantaneous transactions. Right. So the way this works is, let's say Mark and I want to transact. We could do it on chain and pay the really high fees and wait for 6 blocks before we actually transact, or we could open this channel between the two of us. Right. Each of us put some amount of money in the channel. Let's say I put 2 coins and Mark put. And let's say the Bitcoin world knows that together in this channel we have 5 coins, and then we can exchange the value between the two of us however many times we want without needing to hit the blockchain every single time, right? This allows for instantaneous transactions. Basically, it now allows for using crypto in a face-to-face commerce setting, which is really valuable. It allows for cheaper transactions because you no longer need to pay the really high fees. It also allows for transactions that are smaller than the typical Bitcoin transaction, if you will, right? So today, if you try to transact on Bitcoin, you'll see there's a limit of 10,000 satoshis just built into the system, but also it doesn't really make sense to kind of make small transactions, and that exists across all of the developed world infrastructure, which you cannot really send transactions that are below a cent, if you will. With Lightning Network, you can. The limit is 1 satoshi. Which it varies with the Bitcoin price, but right now I think it's just significantly less than 1/100 of a penny, which is really valuable, right? There's also this 4th benefit, which I think is really important, and I'm all going to do this, but I think it's really exciting, and that allows for participants within separate blockchains to transact with one another, which is really valuable, right? Because now you can have somebody who has a Litecoin amount to transact, somebody has a Bitcoin amount, without losing custody of those funds, so without having a third party in the middle of the transaction, right? So why do we want to talk about this today? It's because the Lightning Network is finally able to process transactions on mainnet. That's courtesy of a development that the startup called Lightning Labs introduced last week. They've done a really good amount of work there. It's still early days, so you cannot really do much with it, but it's going to develop fairly well, right? So I think that's really something to get into it. The other thing that I'd like to announce is that if you want to know more about this, we at the DCI we're going to be discussing this topic in a little bit more detail. We're going to co-organize an event called the L2 Summit with Fidelity here in Boston in May 18th, 19th, and we're definitely going to be discussing more about this then. If I leave you with nothing more, I'd like for everyone to kind of remember that the fact that blockchains have limitations today doesn't mean that they'll have those limitations forever, right? Because this technology moves really fast, and I think we're going to see some amazing development shortly. So let me pause right there, give everyone else a chance to talk, and let me pass over to Stephen.
So actually, before we go on to Stephen, Alin, if you could just field this question from our audience about does the layer 2 work that you're working on, what effect would it have on the energy cost to process transactions?
So the energy cost to process transaction doesn't change, right? You will have a whole lot fewer on-chain transactions, which is valuable, but a transaction is a transaction, and there's a whole lot of other efforts towards reducing that energy cost, but Lightning Network itself doesn't change the energy cost to process transaction.
Thanks, Alin. Okay, Stephen.
So welcome everyone. I'm Steve Gordon. I am a faculty member at Babson College, which is a small medium-sized business school in Wellesley, Massachusetts. All of our undergraduates are business majors, and we do have some graduate, we have an MBA and a few other graduate programs. I'm a relatively newbie in this space. I think I first began to be interested in the blockchain and cryptocurrencies about 2 years ago. About a year ago, I thought about the implications for business and wondered if any of my co-faculty members were offering any courses in it or knew anything about it. I found out they weren't. I did a search on the web to find out if there were any schools that were teaching about blockchain to businesses, and I was surprised I could not find any syllabi for business applications. There were syllabi at MIT and at Stanford and other places that were very technical in nature. And I don't know how many of those of you who are listening here today know a great deal, but my thinking was that this is something that touches really every area of business. It touches finance, it touches accounting, it touches operations, it touches law, it touches almost every area that we teach in. And as a result, the need to understand how blockchain can be used is great. And as a result, I decided I would create a course at Babson and actually began to teach it this semester. So it is interesting. I opened, it's at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I figured nobody would attend. But in fact, within about 10 seconds, the course was filled, all with seniors, second semester seniors getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning for this class. So it shows that interest is high. We are at the top of the hype cycle, as Mark has said, but things will change, I think, for the better. I did want to tell you just before going into some use cases, tell you a little bit about the course. And what I want to do is share my screen. So let me do that. I think here you can see how the course is organized. And for the most part, use cases are a predominant section of the course. We do have 6 sections on technology. And let me see if I can do this, make it a little bigger. Six sessions on technology, and then some other sessions on a variety of different things. You'll see cryptocurrency takes up only 2 of our sessions, relatively small amount. Cryptocurrency and economics. We deal with the regulatory and legal aspects, and there are a couple of sessions on smart contracts. On the technology topics, we have some things that that you would need to understand in order to be able to follow any discussion about a blockchain. And we do have a whole bunch of use case topics. And I was at a IDC Directions conference yesterday, actually, and we were talking about, let's see, how do I get back? Oh, stop sharing. We were talking about the various use cases, and what IDC claimed, and I tend to think it's true, is that the questions that they're getting as consultants by industry throughout is that 95% of those relate not to public blockchains, but to permissioned or private blockchains. And a lot of the use cases right now, the alpha and beta implementations of these use cases are almost entirely on permissioned blockchains. So we've done a reasonable amount of focus on the permission blockchains with a good number of use cases. I can go, do I have time to go into one? I think so. So for example, for those, I don't know how well this as an audience understands what the use cases might be, but let's take as an example the diamond manufacture or the diamond mining, the supply chain from diamond mining to eventual sale of a diamond. And so Everledger, I think, is the lead in this particular case. If you do a Google search on Everledger and diamonds, or even blockchains and diamonds, their name will come up. But basically what they've done is they found a way to essentially make a fingerprint of the diamond, identify its source, identify its cut, color, clarity, all of the various aspects you want, identify every transaction that takes place, how much was paid for it, for the diamond cutter, eventually for it going to retail, and then essentially being sold. And so anyone who's selling such a diamond that's been tracked along the blockchain has a record of where it stands, an immutable record, cannot be changed, of every place where that diamond was exchanged along the way. So if anyone is worried about purchasing diamonds from conflict areas, they can be assured that that was not the case, and the value of the diamond from the retailer's perspective could also go up. I did see a question, what do I think of blockchain for voting? And that's interesting, because I do think that there are applications there for voting. We have one of the things that, if I could share my screen again, is that we do have a variety of, I think voting was one of the applications, maybe not, but my students are required to do an industry study, and two of my students did an industry study on voting. And I do think that there's promise there. I think a recent voting in someplace in South Africa, perhaps Botswana, was done by blockchain. So I think that there certainly is promise there. Another question, which technology do you feel is the best prospect to deal with fraud and rollback of blockchain transactions? So blockchain, there are a bunch of questions. I'm not sure how many of them you want me to answer. Let me ask Mark, who's moderating this.
Yeah, go ahead, and if you don't have to answer everyone, the three of us can also answer by typing. But if you see one, Steve, that calls to you, feel free to answer it. And then what I'll do is, why don't you actually tell you what, guys, I'll give one more presentation real quick, and then all three of us can circle back and give some thoughtful answers to, we'll leave a good 10, 15 minutes for Q&A. All three of us will circle back and answer your questions. I think that'll be more productive.
Makes sense.
Okay. So thanks both Alin and Stephen for sharing. So now we'll circle back to the works we're doing at the Digital Currency Initiative at the MIT Media Lab, which is where both Alin and I work. I'm a graduate researcher there and a project manager as well. So I wear a couple hats. One of the hats I wear is managing our DCI working groups model. This is an exciting time where tons and tons of student interest from across campus is pouring into the DCI. Stephen kind of mentioned this. We've actually been teaching classes on blockchain for 2 years now. So long before it was you know, the boom kind of happened both at the business school at Sloan, and we've also been, the DCI specifically has been involved in teaching some engineering classes. So we actually publish the engineering class content on our website. We're about to launch a new website very soon. And so I will try to find a way to send a link to our new website. And well, it's easy if you want to write it down now. It's dci.mit.edu. You can go to our website right now, but you can also, I'll try to send a newsletter link so you can subscribe if you're interested in receiving updates from us occasionally. But we have classes, as I said, and working groups. And working groups are the way that we bring MIT students from across different disciplines, from the School of Engineering, from the School of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence, to the business school, system dynamics, bringing and creating teams of students with different skill sets to hack on pressing topics in this space. So this year we had a pretty competitive application process because there is so much interest, and we were able to form about 8 different working groups focused on different things. Everything from working with our colleague Rob Ali on prototyping and thinking through fiat cryptocurrency. So this would be like the US dollar becoming a cryptocurrency, to new ways to do auditing with zero knowledge proofs, which is an exciting method in cryptography, to more of the finance side, working with groups like Fidelity to come up with valuation frameworks for crypto assets and ICOs. One of those working groups is the one that I lead, research that we've been doing for about 2 years now. The project is called Verify, and it's a project focused on providing verifiable records and verifiable claims to support financing for small, medium-sized enterprises, or really any enterprises, especially ones and supply chains. So this actually grew out of some research I was doing a couple of years ago on blockchain-based land title, which we presented to the Mexican government, the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Economy at the time. And they were very interested in this possibility. There's lots of land title pilots going on around the world. But they also directed our attention to this other asset that we hadn't really considered, which was stored agricultural commodities. So warehouse receipts are a type of financial instrument that allows a farmer, for example, to deposit his coffee or his or her coffee in a warehouse, get a paper certificate of deposit of those goods being stored there, and then bring that document to a bank to pledge those goods as collateral for a loan. It's been found by World Bank and through numerous studies from the World Bank, the UN, and others to have a positive impact on the availability of credit, affordability of credit, and also things like price discovery and food security, especially in agricultural markets. However, there's also been a lot of frauds, some very high-profile frauds that introduce both institutional and systemic risk to the system and to the economy, and so there's a desire to fortify these record systems to de-risk and therefore open up more credit and more societal benefits. So we've been taking this warehouse use case as a very concrete, simple example of a way to bring more transparency and dynamism to asset-backed securities markets more broadly, so that especially thinking about issues like 2008, where you had systemic risk buildup in the mortgage-backed securities market because of obscurity and all kinds of and the trading of derivatives, of which the underlying assets were actually very tenuous, it turned out. We're approaching this huge problem by narrowing in on a very, very specific use case in warehouses. And if you think about it, there's actually trillions of dollars of commodities and assets stored in warehouses all over the world. And then once you start to grow out of that very specific use case, you can think about all kinds of other types of financial instruments and assets, including immaterial assets like accounts receivables that can be used to generate more working capital for everyday small, medium-sized enterprises and bigger, to allow economies to be both more dynamic and more resilient to some of the catastrophic collapses that we can see in things like 2008. So that was a bit of a long explanation, but I'll just toggle over and click the share screen button here real quick and show you the prototype that we built, because I know that sometimes blockchain conversations can be very high level and we never actually show you what we're building. So let me just show you real quick kind of a I don't have the code ready to show you, but I'll show you the, here we go, share screen. I'll show you the presentation. This is our new website, which we'll be launching soon, by the way. But here's a, oops, there we go. So this is, I hope you can all see my screen. This is what a warehouse might look like. But this is the, the image that I'm showing you is, I'm trying to go to the next image. There we go. Here's a system overview, what we've created. So the prototype is written in Java, and we're in the process of developing a pilot kit, which will be an open source package of code, implementation instructions, and use case ideas. And we're trying to create a very simple model for warehouses with the idea that software developers around the world can, working with governments or development banks or anybody in agricultural finance or beyond, can take this and actually customize it for various other use cases other than, including warehouses, but not limited to warehouses. So in this use case, we have a farmer depositor, a warehouse system, and the warehouse system includes both the warehouse employee and warehouse digital devices. So we actually demonstrate an IoT component where we have a digital scale that communicates independently with the ledger, verifying or disputing the entry of the warehouse employee. And this can be really helpful if you could think about plugging in satellite information or drone imaging or lasers measuring grain pouring into a warehouse, or RFID location devices to have an added level of security backing up or disputing the warehouse employees' records, because oftentimes some of the frauds happen at the warehouse employee level. And then the bank, and then we've been using the Bitcoin blockchain as a public blockchain to hash information based. It's a naming convention that we came up with, which is the combination of a hash and some high-level data. And then the rest of the data is stored on a separate server. So it's not a completely decentralized system, but it's kind of a combination of the two. And then we can walk you through a few different actions that you can take. So if a farmer comes in and deposits his or her goods, that deposit is first signed by the warehouse employee and any digital devices. The farmer receives an SMS and is invited to sign that transaction, at which point the transaction is hashed to the Bitcoin blockchain. The second step is pledging those goods as collateral. So the farmer comes in and says, I'd like to pledge 100 units of coffee as collateral for a loan. The bank first queries that previous block where the deposit hash exists, to confirm that, yes, this farmer actually has these units to pledge, and then can begins a second transaction, which is uploading a loan terms document along with any other, with those loan terms, both at the document level, which is hash, but also at an application level in a smart contract that will self-execute the terms of that contract. So for example, if the loan terms expire in 30 days and the loan is not repaid, you can, at a smart contract level, at an application layer level, execute a smart contract to automatically repermission the pledged collateral over to the lender if the loan is yet unpaid. And so that's an example of where we're leaving a lot of room for customization, but we're trying to demonstrate what you can do with that. So that's just a very quick bang intro, and I think we have 15 more minutes, so I will stop there and we can turn back to some of your questions. And I'm just trying to figure out how to get back to that screen, sorry. But Stephen and Alin, I invite you to hop back on here and help me. If you've looked at any of those questions and you want to chime in on any of those, we can get to that.
Sure. I think, Mark, if you move your cursor up to the top of the screen, there's an option to
stop share. Got it.
Stop sharing. There you
Thank
go.
you.
Okay. Yes, I'm happy to answer any of the questions. So let me first, since I think the one about diamonds was addressed to me, probably what's the point of the diamond blockchain if it's not going to be public? So the point of a blockchain, of a private blockchain, is that it doesn't have to be public. Ideally, what you want is to have those people who are interacting on the blockchain and putting transactions on it known to you and verified and verifiable by all the parties that actually agree that the entry on the blockchain is good. Now, there's another question about who can view the blockchain. Even though a blockchain may be private, governance is really an interesting question, because there are many different ways in which you can set up governance of a blockchain, but even for a private blockchain, you can allow for public viewing of the items on that blockchain. So that certainly makes it possible. The question is it susceptible to attacks? Perhaps theoretically so, but the fact that you know who the people who can put, who are those who can put transactions on the blockchain makes it pretty clear that it is not going to be attacked. It is a good use case. It's being used, and there are similar use cases in anything of value, such as wine. Art is another good example, or things that even if they don't have too much value, you want to know the provenance of. So Walmart is using it for knowing where some of their goods come from. They don't want it to come from factories where there's child labor. There are some companies who are using it for responsible fishing, for example, and it would be a similar type of application, simply following through all the transactions and making sure that it's with people that you trust. Now, whether or not they can get around the system, just because you verified them as being an organic farmer or as a fisher, as a fishing company that uses only sustainable practices. Of course, they can be certified and qualified, but then perhaps they can cheat. And there are ways to get around that too, for example. And one of the things that Mark was talking about is the ability to use the IoT. So if we actually have a camera on the ship that can actually see the catch as it's being done, we can use that and put that on the blockchain, or actually we wouldn't put the whole video on the blockchain, we'd put it elsewhere, but we would have a link to it on the blockchain. So I think that these are good use cases, or I would argue that these are good use cases.
Thanks, Stephen. So I heard a couple of clarifying questions. The URL I was providing is DCI, that's Digital Currency Initiative, .mit.edu. I'm also going to tweet, I can't figure out a way to share a link with all of you, so I'm just going to tweet the link to our website and a link to subscribe to a new email list that we're creating. We want to be able to share the research and papers that are coming out. We're not going to do like a weekly newsletter-y type thing, but we will send you a new paper, like send out a paper or let you know about what working groups are going on. And that actually connects to your question. I see a question from Bill Wendell I wanted to share. We would love more alumni engagement. So much of MIT, as we all know, is mens at manus and action learning. I think there's lots of opportunities to connect what the students and researchers are working on with what alumni, the problems that our alumni are seeing from different perspectives and industries. And so I think engaging with us through our newsletter is a great way to stay in touch with what kinds of things we're working on. And our emails, we're easy to connect with over email. You can email at us at dci@media.mit.edu. And I'm happy to, you can find me on Twitter at Mark R. Weber. Always happy to be a resource to help connect the alumni community with the work that we're doing here. I see a question about online resources for non-technical business executives. That's a good question. We have technical resources available. it's hard to it's really, honestly, finding good resources in this space is really hard because because it's hard to differentiate kind of the fact from fiction and hype from what's actually being, done. So I'm going to think about that more, and we're going to be trying to find ways to provide both technical and non-technical resources for you guys that you can trust, because oftentimes unfortunately when they're coming from corporations, they're in a sales mentality. They want to sell you their services, their blockchain services. And so we're trying to figure out how we can provide more neutral resources. Alin, are you still with us? Did you see any questions?
I am.
Chime in on?
Yes. Two comments that I wanted to make. Thanks, Mark. So the first one, I would say, I'm actually quite happy to see that there's a healthy amount of skepticism on the folks that attend this call, which is great. We at the DCI very much encourage that. The fact that you hear blockchain solves everything, I would say that, I think both Steve and Mark kind of addressed that, right? Hype is high. So a good amount of skepticism is a really, really good way to address this. There's also a lot of research going on. Folks haven't really figured out, that's probably the reason why we haven't seen a lot of adoption yet, because, companies are still trying to figure it out, right? One of the things that we at the DCI are focusing on is permissionless blockchains, right? We do a lot of work on permissionless blockchains. We don't really go into permissioned blockchains to some extent because we don't have a lot of stuff to add there, because the space is fairly well served by the likes of IBM or Microsoft or all the other technology companies, right? The other end is we believe that the impact for permissionless blockchain can be significantly bigger than the ones for permission blockchains. So that's kind of the one point that I'd like to make. The other thing I wanted to address is a couple of really interesting ones. The first one I thought is pretty cool is the fact that central banks attack Bitcoin and they say that it's a Ponzi scheme. And this is something that has happened, I think, ever since Bitcoin started. It's a new approach. The reason why Bitcoin has value is not because it's backed by some underlying infrastructure or anything. It's because the energy is X, and you use a lot of energy, so that's why it's value, right? It's value because people think it has value. Communities of individuals have come together and said, you know what, we think this has true value, and the banks are right. Whenever these communities of individuals say, you know what, Bitcoin doesn't have value anymore, then the value is going to fall down, right? I don't think they're necessarily wrong. I mean, they're thinking that yes, there's not something that backs up Bitcoin, and they're right. But I wouldn't underestimate this ethos of decentralized technology, and the fact that communities of individuals are really looking for alternatives to centralized models. And I think that's what Bitcoin proposes. Propose an alternative. It's the first time that with Bitcoin, it's the first time we actually had an alternative for moving money without involving banks. That's a fairly powerful movement, right? Should that mentality change and communities of individuals realize, okay, you know what, Bitcoin is actually not valuable? Yes, the value is going to go to zero because there's no underlying asset that backs it up. But this has been going on for 10 years now. It's hard to say, yes, there's no value there. So that's one thing that I think it's relevant. And then I have another one that I wanted to address because I thought it's very slick around consensus mechanisms, whether it's proof of work, proof of stake, proof of useful activity, whatever, name it, right? Proof of work is the one that works today, and it has been, it has been tested, it has been battle tested. It has many flaws. It uses a lot of energy. It's incredibly dumb as a calculation, if you will. It's kind of inefficient. So many flaws, but it works. And when it was introduced as a way to stop spam in networks. And the fact that it is attached to that has introduced in conjunction with Bitcoin, it was actually a fairly brilliant move, and it has a lot of value. So yes, it's not perfect, and there's a lot of research to replace it. But so far, there's no obvious winner, if you will. Proof of stake, there are approaches to introduce proof of stake. Delegate consensus. Algorand has a very interesting approach that just came out. Ethereum does a lot of research on proof of stake, but it's not obvious that it will work. Yes, I mean, folks do believe that it will work, but it's not obvious. And it's hard to say that in the future proof of work will absolutely go away. We may see different alternatives. We may see maybe it's a hybrid model. Who knows? But again, I would not assume that that's because we're proof of work right now. Then that's never going to change. And sorry, I know it's a long answer, so I'll stop right there.
I can also jump in on that. There are some distributed ledger approaches that aren't even blockchain that work on very different consensus algorithms. And I know HashChain is very big at MIT, and that's the DAG, the directed acyclical graph approach for distributed ledger technology. So that's something that you should look into. I know let me also add, there were some questions about where you can learn more if you're less technical, and I do have 3 sources that I'd like to recommend. One is, let's see, I'm viewing Mark's screen. One is the chain letter from MIT Tech Review. So I pretty much trust that. I think it's pretty good, and it's not very technical, but certainly you can Google that and you can sign up for it, and it comes out, I think, either once a day or once a week, fairly frequently. There's another news item that comes out on a pretty much a daily basis called the Distributed Ledger, and another one called Medium Daily Digest. So you might want to follow any of those 3.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good. Thanks for bringing those up. You know, we've had good relationships with the Tech Review. We're actually partnering with them on an event called the Business of Blockchain, which is coming up. One of the things that we're trying to do at the DCI is partner with the conferences to help you know, guide the conversation and provide some nuance. You know, the interesting example with Tech Review, I don't know if any of you have followed the kind of the story between IOTA, this cryptocurrency IOTA, and the DCI, but this is an example of, you know, some IOTA is a cryptocurrency that was getting a lot of positive press in business because it taps into all the best buzzwords like IoT and crypto and AI, and they have an amazing website. But some of our cryptographers last summer took a closer look at what they were doing and found some real problems and real vulnerabilities. And here, this is like a multi-billion-dollar market cap cryptocurrency. I think it was the 10th largest cryptocurrency at the time, and getting tons of press. And so it's important, even with trusted sources, like there are very smart people at the Tech Review, but they don't have a cryptography team that can actually go in and look at the crypto. And so it's always important from any source to just take everything with a grain of salt and understand that this is a very new space, and to always be playing devil's advocate. And I think that people, that's a way, especially if you're going to be investing or making business decisions in the space, proceed with caution. I think there's lots of, I saw another, on the proof of work, proof of stake debate also, there's so much more to say about that. We are actually planning to do, we had the MIT Bitcoin Expo here this past weekend, and there was a really fantastic debate. We're actually going to try to recreate that debate on a Facebook Live episode through the DCI. So again, that's another reason to sign up to our email list. We'll let you know when we're having some of these more sophisticated debates, because it takes time to really get into the details and do these topics justice, because there are no simple answers, and good people can disagree on the right, what is the right way to do things. I see one question I can answer fairly quickly. So somebody asked, and this is actually probably something people want to know. This is a common question: is for our platform or for our prototype Verify, why did we choose Bitcoin over Ethereum? And why not use ERC20 to tokenize what we're doing? I think that's another way of doing it. When we started this research, we felt Ethereum was really too young and too unproven. We wanted to give Ethereum a couple of years to get its legs under it. And I think, and what we're actually doing is what we call blockchain agnostic, where we're trying to create a protocol, a way of doing something that you could actually you could use Bitcoin or Ethereum. You could also have blockchain redundancies. So if you were really concerned about any one blockchain, you could actually duplicate the protocol to simultaneously hash to the Bitcoin blockchain and to the Ethereum blockchain, and you'd have kind of an added layer of resilience with that record. I think that there are issues. Some that are people, there's some technical issues with Ethereum. I think some of which were revealed, like with the DAO last year, and I think scaling issues like with CryptoKitties this year, that are revealing some of the design flaws. And I think Ethereum is a great project, but it's yet to be seen how robust it'll be. And the same is true with Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's ledger, even though Bitcoin's price has been very volatile, Bitcoin's ledger has been pretty stable over the last 8 years. Let's see, there's so many good questions here. I'm so sorry that we're not going to be able to get to all of them. I, for one, can stay a few extra minutes. I'm not sure, Aaron, how long we have to go, but go ahead, Stephen. You're going to say something.
I was going to ask if we can answer once the session is done. Can we answer them can we continue to answer them by text, or will that go away?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. I
I'm
assume
hoping Aaron can tell us.
Yeah, Aaron, if you're online and you can tell us, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'd be surprised if all of this just disappeared. So I'm pretty sure we can.
Hey guys, it's Erin. I can actually download the questions, and a lot of them I can identify who the who the alum was asking that question. So you could follow up with them over email, even if that works. But you won't be able to use the chat feature once we log off. But we do have the questions to download.
Gotcha. Some of you are asking for some questions like how do public and private blockchains work? Those are the kinds of things, actually, some of this information is easy to get a clear answer just by doing a couple Google searches. There's a lot of good explanations online about how the technology actually works, and those you can trust. The harder thing to trust is what's actually happening in terms of applications. Some of the more creative applications and currencies and tokens. Is a token actually going to do what they say it's going to do? In general, from our office at the DCI, we're very skeptical of the ICO craze. And it's funny because we actually, two of my colleagues wrote a paper 9 months before the ICO craze happened, kind of predicting the AppCoin token economy that eventually came about. We never realized people would be raising $1 billion on it in a matter of weeks. But there's several really concerning things about the space. One is, and a lot of it is, it's an exciting time. It's exciting in the sense, ICOs are exciting in the sense that they can help us envision a time when maybe venture capital doesn't have a stranglehold on all new ventures and projects, and that you could raise capital in almost like an Indiegogo Kickstarter type way, while also providing real and lasting value to the people who are funding you. The problem is that it's outpacing, there's a reason we have various securities laws and investment laws, because people can get burned in this space. And I think the thing that concerns us a lot about even the ICOs that are genuine, I think there's a lot of ICOs that are genuinely good people. They're not all scams. They're not all trying to scam you. But even then, I think, there's a question of, are they kind of making a devil's bargain with regard to if you read the fine print, they don't promise you anything, but on the front page of their website, it seems to promise you something, that if I buy this token, I will be able to do X, Y, and Z with it. But if you read the fine print, they're very explicit, saying that you don't have any right to anything, and we owe you nothing, basically. And so this discrepancy is kind of a red flag when you see this discrepancy between the way something is marketed and the way that the legal fine print actually reads. And so I think that it's a really important space to watch. And I'm sure, all of you, I'm sure some of you are investors, and I think it's great. Take those arrows up for the rest of us. But yeah, we do encourage everyone to proceed with caution. And John Oliver actually did a pretty funny piece on this last week. And it features one of our colleagues, a senior advisor to the DCI, Michael Casey. Oh, by the way, let me plug Michael's book. It's a new book called The Truth Machine. And a bit of a markety title, but the content's really good. And among other things, it actually features some of the work that we've been doing at the DCI, as well as kind of a historical. He paints the historical arc of the technology, even before Bitcoin came about. So those are a couple of additional resources you can check out. So somebody mentioned, oh, you already tackled voting. There's actually a controversy over whether or not it was actually used for voting or not. The government seems to be saying, no, it wasn't used for voting. This is actually another perfect example of where a private company is trying to is overstating what it actually did. So I encourage you to look into the Sierra Leone's, the government's response, the voting commission's response to the company's claim that they did the first blockchain voting, because they actually did not. There are some people in our office who think blockchain voting is a terrible idea, and that in some cases, digital systems are much more susceptible to fraud and corruption than paper-based systems, which in a way paper-based systems are actually a form of distributed system. If you think about it, there's no single point of attack. The paper is literally distributed all over the country, counted by different people all over the country. And so in some cases, if you move to a centralized system with a single point of attack, in a blockchain, even though it's distributed, you still can have a garbage in, garbage out problem. So if you find some single point of attack for the information that's put onto the blockchain, then you could have disastrous results from that. So again, exciting stuff, but we're always playing devil's advocate to some of the hype as well.
We're here at the cutting edge of technology. So I think what we'll see in a few years will be quite interesting. I know that IDC predicts that by 2020, 25% of the global banks, nearly 30% of the manufacturers and retailers, and 20% of healthcare organizations will use the blockchain. That's based on their survey of these various companies. Whether it will come to pass, I don't know, but it's certainly possible.
I'm seeing a few different people ask for our emails. I will actually, Stephen, if it's okay with you, I'll just add our emails onto a slide here and go to and do a quick screen share so that you guys can see our emails and write them down. And Emily, if there's a better way to do that, let me know. I'm not sure if we can send a text message to the entire group or not.
Mark, you can also send a text message here in the chat box if you click all panelists and attendees.
All panelists and attendees. Sorry, everyone. This is my first time using this Zoom. I see all attendees, but I'm not seeing how to send a message.
Down below. Oh, good. Go
No,
ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing. We'll have a survey going out after the broadcast today. It'll go to either today or tomorrow, and we can include any information, Mark and Stephen and Alin, that you'd like to include.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I think our GitHub repository actually has a lot of great information. We have a reading list. The classes we taught are still there. So folks who are interested and want to educate themselves, they can definitely use that. So we can definitely share that as well. And of course, Stephen's, I think Stephen's course should also be added there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm happy to share my PowerPoint.
I'm sorry, I can't seem to figure out how to send a message to everyone, but
Just below where it says to all panelists and attendees, you can type a message in the chat window.
yeah, I don't actually see an all I
Okay.
see participants. I see a participants button, right? Oh, in the chat.
Chat, or not the
I see.
Q&A.
Okay, got it.
And Mark,
Okay. All right, everyone. I'll send our emails and everything right now. So if you want to follow up with us that way, I'll send the link to DPI's website. You can send any links that you have to content for people as well. And I'm also going to send the subscribe link if you want to subscribe to our new email list. And as I said, we're not nearly organized enough to spam you, but we will try to let people know when we come out with a new paper or when we announce, our working groups. And we'd love to have more engagement from the alumni community, especially people who are in the Boston, Cambridge area still, or people who are working in this space. It'd be great to have more engagement from you guys. And we have a Facebook page I'll post as well.
Thanks,
I'm sorry
Mark.
we couldn't get to everyone's questions. Obviously this is a exciting space and there's a lot more to talk about, but hopefully through these other platforms, we can continue the conversation and engagement with you guys. So thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Alin. We'll look forward to, and thank you to all of you who joined us today. I see we had over 175 people, which is great. And we'll look forward to having more engagement with you guys in the future. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye now.
Thank you all, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.